Sometimes, life brings you face to face with the very wound you prayed you'd never reopen. Lauren thought she had finally stitched her life back together. Until the envelope arrived. An invitation to her ex-husband's wedding, the man who once told her she wasn't enough, who walked away while she was still breaking, and tucked inside, a note meant to shame her, to remind her of the place he thought she still belonged below him. But life has a way of rewriting stories when we least expect it. Because when Lauren walked into that wedding, she didn't walk in alone. She walked in beside a man the world called a billionaire, but more importantly, a man who finally saw her worth. What happened next? Well, it wasn't Mark's day anymore. Stay with me. Let's step into Lauren's story. The sun was lowering behind the rooftops when Lauren Harper turned the key and pushed open the door to her small rented townhouse. That late afternoon, kind of light, soft gold forgiving, spilled across the floorboards as if trying its best to welcome her home. But she felt too drained to notice. Her shoulders ached from lifting supply boxes all day at the community center, and her feet throbbed in shoes she'd bought on clearance 3 years ago. She shut the door behind her with a tired sigh and tossed her purse onto the faded armchair beside the entryway. The house smelled faintly of cedar, left over from a candle she'd burned all winter, to make the place feel warmer than it really was. She slipped off her jacket, letting it fall over the banister, and rubbed her temples. Thursday always felt like the longest day. That was when she noticed it. A single envelope on the floor, as if it had slid through the mail slot with too much purpose. It wasn't the kind of mail she was used to. Nothing like the grocery store coupons or medical bills or the final notice letters she stacked neatly on the kitchen counter, hoping someday their tone might soften. No, this envelope had weight. A heavy, cream-colored cardstock. Edges so crisp they looked like they could cut skin. Her name flowed across the front in elegant calligraphy, Miss Lauren Harper. Her stomach tightened. Nobody sent her things like this anymore. She picked it up, feeling the thickness, the way the paper almost resisted her touch, as if it knew what was inside. A strange chill crawled up her spine. She carried it into the kitchen, flicked on the light, and opened it with a careful tear. The card inside gleamed. Gold embossing, curled lettering, flowers framing the border. She didn't need to read more than 3 words before her vision blurred. You are cordially invited. Her ex-husband's name appeared beside another woman's, intertwined like vines on a trellis. Mark Harper and Tessa Crawford request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. Her breath caught sharp and painful. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the names, the date, the venue, everything perfectly printed, everything perfectly wrong. Mark, her husband for 11 years, her world for longer than that. He used to bring home wilted flowers from the grocery store and call it romance. Used to tell her she was too soft-hearted to handle the real world. Used to say their life felt small because she lacked ambition. And then one morning, 2 years ago, he'd stood in their kitchen with his suitcase already packed and said, "I need someone more driven beside me, Lauren. Someone who wants more. Someone who won't hold me back." Those words had carved her open, and now they hummed in her ears like a cruel chorus. Her hands shook as she set the formal invitation down. Something else was tucked behind it, another card, smaller, handwritten. She pulled it free, heart pounding. A short message written in delicate, looping penmanship. "We'd really love for you to see how happy Mark finally is. You're part of his journey after all. Warmly, Tessa." The words looked gentle, polite, but Lauren felt them like a blade sliding between ribs. She pressed her lips together, breathing through the sting. Her fingers trembled as she placed both cards on the counter beside her stack of unpaid electric bills. For a moment, she simply stared at them, feeling her pulse climb into her throat. The landline broke the silence, ringing shrill and old-fashioned, an antique she kept mostly out of stubbornness. She wiped her face quickly with her sleeve and answered. "Hey, sweetheart," her mother's voice sang through, warm and familiar from Dayton. "I was just thinking of you." "How was your day?" Lauren swallowed hard. "Oh, you know, long. Just tired." There was a pause, a long one. "Honey," her mother said softly, "did something happen?" The kindness nearly undid her. "No, Mom," Lauren lied, voice cracking before she caught it. "Just another long day." Her mother didn't push. She never did. "All right. Call me later, if you want company. I love you." "Love you too," Lauren whispered and set the phone down gently. The kitchen felt colder somehow. She leaned on the counter, staring at the elegant card like it was some rare artifact dug up from another life. A life she used to belong to, a life she used to fight for. 11 years. And he'd replaced her in 18 months. She let out a shaky breath, blinking against the burn behind her eyes. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the audacity, the assumption that she would show up, smile politely, and applaud the man who had dismantled her so cleanly. Her gaze drifted to the fridge, the chipped white door covered in outdated magnets. She picked up the invitation, ready to tear it in half, ready to shred every bit of smug cursive into dust. She even held it that way, fingers curled, paper bent. But something inside her shifted. A pulse of defiance, a slow rising heat. Instead of ripping it, she smoothed the fold, gently clearing the crease with her thumb. She lifted a magnet in the shape of a daisy, cheap fading paint, and pinned the invitation right in the middle of the fridge door. The card gleamed beneath the overhead light, pristine and proud. Lauren stared at it, her jaw tightening. "You want me to watch you win, Mark?" Her voice came out quieter than she intended, but stronger too. "We'll see." The room stayed silent, but something in her heart, something she thought had died, rustled awake like a leaf stirring in the wind. A beginning. Or maybe a warning. She wasn't sure yet, but she didn't look away. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air when Lauren pushed open the glass door of the community center cafe the next morning. Kids were already running through the halls, their sneakers squeaking against the worn tile floors. Someone in the kitchen was slamming cabinet doors. The old espresso machine hissed like an irritated cat. It was the kind of noisy, chaotic morning that usually made her smile. But today, everything felt muffled, distant, as if she were walking underwater. She tied her apron, smoothing the wrinkles with a distracted hand. Her coworker Jenny, a college sophomore with a bright ponytail and a habit of noticing everything, shot her a curious look. "You okay, Lauren?" she asked while loading pastries into the display case. "You look like someone unplugged your soul and forgot to plug it back in." But before Lauren could respond, the door chimed. She turned instinctively, coffee pot in hand. A man had walked in. Tall. Maybe 6 feet. Navy sport coat, no tie, white shirt that looked too crisp for a place where the most expensive thing on the menu was a $5 latte. His dark hair showed faint streaks of gray at the temples, distinguished more than old. And he carried himself with a quiet kind of confidence, like someone used to being listened to without ever needing to raise his voice. Lauren didn't know who he was. Later she would learn his name, Andrew Callahan, or Drew, as most people called him. She would learn a lot more than that too. But in that moment, all she saw was a man with kind eyes who looked out of place among the chipped mugs and paper decorations taped to the walls. He stepped up to the counter just as she turned with a fresh cup of coffee. Her thoughts were far away, too far. The wedding invitation, the smug handwriting, the ring she no longer wore but still felt like a ghost around her finger. She turned too quickly. The cup slipped. Hot coffee arced through the air in a slow-motion nightmare and splashed directly across the front of his perfect white shirt. A sharp gasp went up from the two mothers waiting in line. Someone muttered, "Oh no!" "Oh my God!" She lunged for a stack of napkins, her hands trembling wildly. "I am so sorry. Oh no, this is... Oh, your shirt." She reached toward him, dabbing at the spreading stain, then pulled her hand back, horrified at her own impulsiveness. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't. You must be. I ruined your God. I don't even know what to say." She expected anger. She expected the tightening of a jaw, the clipped reprimand, the demand to see a manager. Men who dressed like that usually came with expectations attached. But instead he looked down at the mess, then up at her face, really looked. His eyes softened, and a small, almost amused smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Hey," he said gently, "it's all right. It's just a shirt." She blinked, caught off guard. He took one of the napkins from her hand, more to calm her than to help. "Honestly," he added, lowering his voice, "you look like you've had a worse week than I have." The words hit deeper than they should have. Lauren felt something inside her wobble like a chair with a broken leg. And before she could stop it, a sound slipped out of her. Half laugh, half sob, "You have no idea," she whispered, pressing a fist to her mouth to hold herself together. He didn't pry, didn't ask questions, didn't look embarrassed or annoyed. He just nodded once, slow and understanding, as if giving her permission to feel whatever she was feeling. That kindness, unexpected, undeserved, stung more than any anger would have. She forced herself back behind the counter, cheeks burning as she rang up his order. He paid in cash, leaving a tip large enough to make Jenny's eyes widen, then carried his coffee to an empty corner table. Unlike most adults who came through here, he wasn't scrolling through his phone in frantic swipes. He sat with a tablet, reading something dense-looking, occasionally glancing up at the room as if observing it, absorbing it. Lauren tried to shake the embarrassment off. She refilled the sugar caddies, wiped down the counter, helped a kid pick the marshmallows out of the hot cocoa mix, the usual chaos. But her gaze kept drifting toward the man in the corner. He didn't seem like someone who belonged in a place with mismatched chairs and crayon drawings taped to the windows. And yet, there was something oddly comforting about how relaxed he looked there, like he wasn't in a rush to be anywhere else. Near the end of her shift, the cafe quieted. Only 2 seniors played cards at a back table, and the noise of children had faded into distant echoes. Lauren carried a cloth to wipe down the tables. She moved toward his corner heart, doing something stupid and fluttery in her chest. He didn't seem to notice her at first. Then he glanced up with that same gentle expression, the one that made her feel seen without feeling exposed. His voice was soft when he spoke. If that coffee incident came with a story. "I've got time to kill before my next meeting." Lauren froze, fingers tightening around the cloth. She should walk away. That would be the sensible thing. She didn't owe him a story, or an explanation, or anything. But something about the way he'd said it, without pressure, without pity, hit a place in her that had been locked up for too long. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the humiliation still burning under her skin. Maybe it was the fact that he hadn't looked at her like she was a disaster. Her voice was barely audible. "It's not really a story. Just life." He nodded at the empty chair across from him, a quiet invitation. Lauren hesitated. Then, against every guarded instinct she'd built since the divorce, she slid into the chair. "Just 2 minutes," she said, more to herself than to him. But the way he watched her patient, open, steady, made 2 minutes feel like the beginning of something she couldn't quite name. Something like the faintest crack of light breaking through a very long night. The air had that early autumn bite, the kind that whispered change was coming even before the leaves fully surrendered their greens. Lauren walked alongside Drew through the small city park, a few blocks from the community center, hands tucked into her cardigan pockets. Gravel crunched beneath their shoes. Somewhere in the distance a child laughed, followed by the echo of a basketball hitting pavement. A train horn sounded far off, lonely and low. It felt like the kind of day where secrets could slip out without meaning to. Drew didn't hurry her. He didn't fill the silence with polite chatter either. He just walked steady, present, matching her pace, as if she were setting the rhythm without knowing it. Finally, with a shaky breath, she began. "It wasn't just the divorce," she said, watching a leaf twirl lazily to the ground. "It was everything that came before it. Mark always had this way of making me feel like I was too small for the life he wanted. Too soft. Too stationary." She let out a humorless laugh. "He once told me he needed someone more ambitious. I still hear that word when I'm brushing my teeth." Drew didn't react with shock or judgment. He simply walked, letting her continue. And then, the fertility treatments. Her voice caught, and she pressed her lips together before pushing on. 2 years of doctors and needles, and hope that felt more like bargaining. I was exhausted. Physically, emotionally, financially. She blinked hard, the park blurring slightly. He blamed me toward the end. Quietly. Subtly. But blame has a smell, you know. You can sense it, even when no one says it aloud. Drew's steps slowed, as if giving the moment room. Lauren swallowed. After the divorce, I tried to go back to teaching, but every hallway reminded me of what I didn't have, what I'd lost. So I left. And now, I spend my mornings handing out coffee and trying to remember what hope used to feel like. They reached a bend in the path where the trees opened to a small pond, the surface calm, except for a single duck cutting through it. Lauren stopped walking. And then yesterday she whispered that wedding invitation. I don't know if it was meant to hurt me, but it did. More than I expected. She let out a trembling breath, bracing herself for pity. But when Drew finally spoke, his tone held something different, something quiet and earnest. I'm sorry, he murmured. You didn't deserve any of that. She nodded, grateful but not trusting her voice enough to answer. They resumed walking. After a few beats, Drew cleared his throat as though weighing whether to unburden himself in return. You should know, he said softly, you're not the only one who feels cornered right now. Lauren looked over at him, surprised. He exhaled long and slow, the breath pushing white into the cool air. I'm not just some guy in a wrinkled shirt you spilled coffee on. His lips twitched slightly at the memory. I founded a clean energy company about 20 years ago. Callahan Renewables. It started as a little garage project, me 3 engineers, and a dream about wind turbines in the Midwest. Lauren's eyebrows rose. She didn't speak, waiting for more. It grew, he continued, faster than anyone predicted. Suddenly, there were investors, a board, partnerships, and then expectations. His jaw tightened. Now we're looking at a massive land deal in Montana. Could triple our wind production. But the old money family that owns the property, well, let's just say they still think the world runs on cigar smoke and handshakes between dynasties. She frowned, not fully understanding. And where do you fit into that? He gave a humorless smile. They want me to marry their daughter. Lauren stopped walking. Excuse me, they think it'll solidify the alliance. He made air quotes with a tired flick of his fingers. My board loves the idea. My father thinks it's brilliant strategy. He shook his head, eyes drifting toward the pond. But no one seems to care that I don't even know the woman. They all talk about my life like it's just another contract, like I'm the merger on the table. The wind stirred, brushing cold across Lauren's cheeks. She tried to find the right word, settling on the only honest one. Awful. He let out a soft laugh, but it held no real humor. Success traps you sometimes. People think it frees you, but that's only true until the golden cage closes. Then you realize everyone wants a piece of the man, but no one ever asks the person what he wants. 2 people on different paths, somehow walking the same emotional road. You know, Lauren said a little shyly, I looked at you this morning and thought, that man has everything put together. And I looked at you, Drew replied, and thought, she deserves better than whatever storm she's walking through. She smiled, small, but the first genuine one in days. They walked a little farther, talking about nothing heavy this time. Childhood memories. Favorite Midwest diners. How he preferred winter and she preferred fall. How both of them, in very different ways, had somehow drifted into feeling like secondary characters in the stories of their own lives. That's the worst part, Lauren said, nudging a pebble with her shoe. At some point, I stopped being the main person in my own decisions. Drew nodded slowly. Same. They reached an old wooden bench overlooking the pond. A few geese honked somewhere out of sight. The world felt still. Open, like it was waiting. Drew stopped walking and turned toward her. His expression wasn't bold or dramatic. It was gentle, thoughtful, with a hint of something wry underneath, like he was about to suggest something impossible but not entirely insane. Lauren, he said, quietly. She looked up. Maybe what we need, he said, is a different story. The words hung between them, soft, dangerous, hopeful. Lauren felt her heart shift just slightly, as if rearranging itself to make room for possibilities she hadn't dared imagine. She didn't answer. She couldn't yet, but her silence wasn't rejection. It was the beginning of something unnamed. Something waiting to unfold. For 3 days, Lauren told herself she wasn't thinking about him. Not about the way his voice softened when he listened. Not about how he'd looked at her like her pain wasn't something to be fixed, but something to be honored. Not even about that last sentence he'd left hanging in the cool autumn air. Maybe what we need is a different story. She tried ignoring all of it. But every morning when she unlocked the cafe doors, her eyes flicked just for a second toward the corner table where he'd sat. Ridiculous, she scolded herself. He was probably on a plane to another coast, solving problems that required boardrooms and suits and people who understood words like renewables portfolio optimization. Then on the fourth morning, when she pushed open the cafe door, the little bell chimed, and there he was. Same corner table, same black coffee. Same calm, unreadable expression except for the faintest, unmistakable smile when their eyes met. Her breath faltered. He waited until the lunch rush faded, until kids stopped pounding up and down the hallway, until Jenny took over the register. Then he set down his tablet and walked slowly to the counter. "How long until you're done for the day?" he asked. She blinked. 30 minutes. "I'll wait," he said, simply stepping back toward his table. No explanation, no agenda. But she felt it, the weight of something approaching, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. When her shift ended, she untied her apron with hands that felt suspiciously unsteady. Drew stood slipping on his coat, offering her a small, polite smile that somehow made her stomach flutter like a teenager's. "Walk with me." She hesitated because she knew this wasn't just a walk. But she nodded anyway. They left the cafe and wandered into a quiet residential street lined with old maple trees. Their branches arched overhead like a cathedral ceiling, filtering the afternoon light into soft gold. Leaves covered the sidewalks, in crisp layers rustling with each step. For a while they walked in companionable silence. Lauren welcomed it. Silence with Drew didn't feel empty, it felt like a place she could rest. Finally he spoke. "I've been thinking about what you told me," he said. "About the invitation." "The note." Lauren gave a small groan. "Please don't remind me." But he continued gently, as if painting a picture he needed her to see. "Imagine it," he murmured. "You walk into that wedding, head high, wearing something that makes the whole room turn to stare." His voice softened, almost conspiratorial. "And you're not alone. You walk in on the arm of someone who chose you, someone Mark can't diminish or explain away." She let out a startled laugh. "Sure, let me just order a date off the internet." He didn't laugh with her. Instead, he slowed his steps, turning slightly until she had to face him. "What if you didn't have to?" Her smile faded. "What does that mean? What if he said carefully, you and I helped each other?" His expression was steady, too steady. Her pulse stuttered. "Helped? How for me?" he said. "Showing up already married means the board stops pushing the merger marriage." He swallowed hard, a rare crack in his composure. "It means I get my life back." She frowned. "And for me, if you show up married," he said quietly, "Mark loses his narrative. He can't frame you as the sad, forgotten ex. He can't use you as a prop in his success story." She stared at him. And stared. And kept staring because her mind refused to process the implication. Finally she whispered, "Drew, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" He held her gaze. His eyes, normally calm, steady, now held something fierce beneath the surface. Resolve. Desperation. Hope. "Lauren," he said, "I can give you an exit from that story, and you can give me mine." A breeze swept through the street, carrying a swirl of leaves across their feet. The world suddenly felt too still, too quiet. She shook her head, stunned. "You're talking about marrying someone you barely know." "Yes," he said. "You'd marry a woman you've known for, 8 days? To get out of a business deal?" His answer was immediate, not defensive, not ashamed, just truthful. "No," he murmured. "To get out of a life I never agreed to." Her breath caught. There it was, the raw truth he'd kept hidden under all that composure. The man the world saw was powerful, unshakable, decisive, but the man standing in front of her now looked human. Tired, cornered, and yet somehow hopeful. She stepped back, needing space to breathe. The idea was impossible, irresponsible, reckless, and yet, for the first time in 2 years, she felt something stir inside her. A spark she'd forgotten the shape of. A small, trembling possibility that maybe, just maybe, her life didn't have to stay stuck where he left it. Drew watched her carefully, as if afraid to say more, afraid to spook the fragile moment growing between them. Lauren looked down the quiet street, sunlight flickering between the branches, and felt her heart tilt toward something wild. "Not yet," But the silence that stretched between them wasn't rejection. It was the beginning of a decision that would change everything. City Hall in Cincinnati was not built for romance. Lauren felt that truth the moment she pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the lobby where fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the linoleum floor had been scrubbed so many times it had lost any hint of shine. The air smelled faintly of hand sanitizer and aging paper, an odd mix that somehow made her palms sweat even more. Drew walked beside her, steady and calm, his presence grounding even as her heart hammered a frantic rhythm. A handful of couples sat scattered across the rows of creaky metal chairs. A nervous young pair clutched hands so tightly their knuckles were white. An elderly couple shared a quiet joke, their laughter soft and familiar. Two men in matching sweaters whispered to each other, excitement radiating from them like warmth. It was a strange place to be making a life-altering decision. Then again, her entire life the past few years had felt strange. At the front desk, Drew spoke in his low, composed voice, confirming the appointment he'd made that morning. The clerk stamped a form with a bored thunk and motioned them toward a hallway where a few people were already waiting in line for their turn. Lauren stood stiffly beside Drew, her hands twisting in front of her. He glanced down at her, reading the fear she couldn't voice. "We can walk out," he said gently. "Right now. No hard feelings." She shook her head, swallowing. A beat passed. Then another. He tried again. "You don't owe me anything, and you don't have to prove anything to anyone." But she wasn't thinking about him. She was thinking about Mark. About the day he told her she wasn't ambitious enough, not driven enough, not enough of anything. About the fertility clinic waiting rooms where she sat alone while he paced the hallways, frustrated not with the situation but with her. About the wedding invitation pinned to her fridge like a trophy she never earned. She was thinking about the slow shrinkage of her world, the quiet dimming of her voice. And suddenly the idea of stepping back into herself, into a story she had chosen, even if it was reckless, felt like breathing after being underwater. "I'm tired," she whispered. "Tired of being the one left behind." Drew held her gaze steady, unjudging. She exhaled shakily. "Let's do it." His jaw tightened not with hesitation, but with acceptance. "Resolve." He nodded once. "Okay." They were called into a small room that looked more like a DMV booth than a place where new futures were made. The officiant barely looked up from his script. No flowers, no pageantry, just words printed on a laminated sheet and spoken in a monotone that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times. "Do you, Andrew Michael Callahan, take?" Lauren's heart thudded, her vision blurring slightly. She caught Drew's profile, strong, calm, reassuring, and she clung to that steadiness. "I do," he said, and then it was her turn. "Do you, Lauren Marie Harper, take?" She felt her throat tighten, not because she doubted her answer, but because of everything. This small, sterile moment represented the end of a story that had broken her and the beginning of a story she had never imagined. "I do." The officiant signed the paper with a squeak of his pen. They followed with their own signatures, her handwriting trembling just slightly. When the man finally looked up, it was only to say, "Congratulations. Next couple, please." No kiss, no applause, nothing to mark the magnitude of what they'd just done. They walked out of the room like two people who had just committed a crime they both wanted to confess and protect in equal measure. On the courthouse steps, sunlight hit them with a muted warmth. Cars passed by, pigeons scattered, and the world continued as though nothing monumental had occurred. Drew turned to her, expression unreadable. Then he reached into his jacket. "Before we walk into your ex-husband's wedding looking like amateurs," he said softly, "we should make this look real." He opened a small velvet box. Lauren's breath caught. Inside was a simple platinum band, no diamonds, no flourish, just elegant, timeless understatement. The kind of ring that spoke not of wealth, but of steadiness. She hesitated. "You bought this today?" He nodded, a faint flush on his cheek. "I wanted something that didn't look like it came from a convenience store." Her laugh trembled, half disbelieving, half grateful. He took her left hand gingerly, as though asking permission without words. When she didn't pull away, he slid the ring onto her finger. The metal was cool at first, then warm as it settled against her skin. She stared at it. It was supposed to be part of the performance. Just a detail. But the weight of it, it made something inside her shift in a way she didn't expect, as if she were stepping into a version of herself she hadn't met yet. Drew watched her quietly, then murmured, "Mrs. Callahan." The name spoken so softly, so sincerely, hit her like a tremor. Not because of revenge, not because of Mark, not even because of the absurdity of what they'd just done, but because for the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel forgotten. She felt chosen. And that was the scariest part of all. She closed her hand around the ring, her pulse fluttering with something fragile and bright, something that might someday grow into hope if she let it. She didn't answer him. Her silence wasn't rejection. It was the sound of her heart trying to understand what it had just agreed to. The boutique didn't look like a store from the outside. It looked like someone's grandmother's house, white brick ivy climbing the walls, a brass door knocker shaped like a rose. No gaudy signage, no mannequins. Just quiet elegance, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. Lauren hesitated on the sidewalk, staring at her reflection in the window. Worn jeans, soft sneakers, ponytail undone at the edges. A woman who blended into grocery store aisles and PTA meetings, not places like this. "You sure this isn't too much?" she whispered. Drew pushed open the door, holding it for her. "It's not too much. It's just a dress, and you deserve one that makes you feel like you belong in whatever room you walk into." She swallowed and stepped inside. The boutique was warm, softly lit, and almost reverent in how quiet it felt. Rows of dresses hung like artwork fabrics in deep tones, structured silhouettes, subtle luxury. Then an older woman emerged from behind a curtain, silver hair in a tidy chignon, glasses on a gold chain, a measuring tape draped around her neck. "Mr. Callahan," she said, smiling, "you vanished for 2 years, and then you waltz in married." Her eyes shifted to Lauren, keen, assessing without being cruel. "So, this must be the woman who finally made sense of him." Lauren startled. "Oh, no, I mean yes, but it's complicated." Marianne lifted a hand, stopping her. "Everything worth wearing is complicated. Come here, dear." Lauren stepped forward, bracing for judgment, but Marianne's gaze softened. "You've got good bones and honest eyes," the stylist said, touching Lauren's chin lightly, as if studying light angles. "That's better than any fabric." Lauren stood there, stunned. Compliments had become rare in her life, rare enough that she didn't recognize one when she heard it. Marianne clapped her hands. "Let's get to work." The first dress was a shimmering silver, beautiful on the hanger. Wrong on her. She stepped out and caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked loud, like she was trying to be someone cooler, someone bolder, someone she had never been. Drew tilted his head politely. "It's a lot of dress." She rushed back into the fitting room. The next dress was soft blush pink off-shoulder. Romantic. Delicate. Too delicate. She felt like a woman pretending to be 22 again, pretending she hadn't lived harsh, heavy years. She stepped out instantly, shaking her head. "No, absolutely not." Drew didn't argue. The third dress was sleek black. Elegant, yes, but it swallowed her personality whole. She couldn't breathe in it physically or emotionally. Back in the fitting room, Lauren leaned her forehead against the cool mirror. She could feel old insecurities, rising whispers from the past. "You don't fit in here. This world is too big for you. You'll embarrass yourself." Her fingers tightened on the zipper when she heard something, Drew's voice from the hallway. Firm, controlled, but holding an edge she'd never heard before. "No," he said sharply. "I told you already. I won't be paraded in front of the Langfords like a prize bull." A pause. Muffled static. Someone arguing on the other end. "My personal life is not negotiable," Drew said, quieter now, but more dangerous. "I won't discuss this again." Lauren froze, breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just pretend for him. It wasn't just a convenient escape hatch. He was fighting battles she couldn't even name, and somehow she was part of the reason he was fighting harder. Her chest tightened. Before she could step out, Marianne swept into the room like a gust of lavender perfume. "I have one more for you," the woman said. "I didn't show it earlier. It's not flashy, but something told me it's yours." She held out a dress in deep forest green, long sleeves, modest neckline, clean lines, fabric that draped like a whisper. Quiet beauty, strength without shouting. The material felt grounding. She slipped into it, slowly breathing in the way the dress settled around her, soft, structured, steadying. She turned toward the mirror, and for the first time in a long time she didn't wince, she didn't shrink. She looked like a woman who had lived, loved, hurt, and kept going. A woman who could walk into a room full of people who doubted her without shrinking beneath their gaze. She stepped out. The boutique fell completely still. Marianne's lips curved into a knowing smile. There she is. But it was Drew's reaction that hit deepest. His phone slipped in his hand, nearly falling before he caught it. He didn't even look embarrassed. He just stared, quiet, astonished, breath unsteady. Not appraising her. Not analyzing. Seeing her. As though the question he'd been subconsciously asking finally had its answer. His voice, when it came, was low and rough-edged. That's the one. Not for the plan. Not for the wedding. Not for Mark. Just the one. Warmth rushed to Lauren's cheeks. The dress wasn't magic, she knew that, but the way he looked at her made her feel like she had stepped into a version of herself she hadn't known she missed. She didn't trust her voice. Didn't trust what might spill out. Instead, she smoothed a hand down the sleeve, grounding herself. Marianne fussed with a pin near Lauren's waist, but even she seemed gentler now, quieter, as if unwilling to break whatever moment had formed between Lauren and Drew. Lauren's heartbeat thudded softly against the fabric, not with fear, not with revenge, but with something she hadn't felt in a long time. The faint, dizzy possibility that she might belong somewhere again. Maybe not to a place, maybe not even to a person, but to herself. She didn't say anything, but her silence was full of beginnings. The country club sat on a stretch of manicured land just outside Columbus, rolling lawns, white fences, and a stone facade meant to signal a kind of inherited elegance. Everything about it whispered, curated, polished, perfect. Exactly the way Mark Harper always wanted his life to look. Lauren sat in the passenger seat of the dark sedan as it pulled up the circular drive. She smoothed her hand over the forest green fabric of her dress, feeling her pulse flutter beneath it. Drew glanced over at her, offering a small, steady smile. "You don't have to prove anything," he said softly. "I know," she whispered, "but I still want to." The car eased to a stop. No limo, no parade, just quiet, deliberate presence. A small group of photographers stood near the entrance, capturing arriving guests. At first, they didn't look twice at the sedan until Drew stepped out. His tall frame, tailored charcoal suit, and calm composure drew immediate attention. One photographer lowered his camera, squinting. "Is that? No way. That's Andrew Callahan." A ripple of recognition spread through them. Drew walked around the car, unhurried, unaffected by the sudden cluster of lenses pivoting toward him. He opened Lauren's door, and when she placed her hand in his, he helped her step out with a gentleness that steadied her nerves more than she expected. Her dress caught the afternoon light, deep green, glinting like polished stone. The simple platinum band on her finger flashed subtly as she brushed a stray curl behind her ear. She felt every eye on them. But for once, the weight of attention didn't make her shrink. Inside, the club's foyer opened into a room lined with soft neutrals, cream champagne blush. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, scattering light across the polished floor. Guests mingled in clusters, sipping champagne, exchanging compliments, rehearsed for occasions like this. Lauren and Drew approached the receiving line, where Mark and his bride, Tessa, stood greeting guests. Tessa wore a sleek ivory gown and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mark stood beside her, jaw-sharp posture, confident, until he saw Lauren. His smile froze. Then resumed, but tighter now, stretched into something practiced. "Well," he said, tone bright with forced warmth, "Lauren. Wow, I didn't expect to see you." She could hear it, the patronizing edge, the assumption that she'd arrived alone, small, forgettable, a footnote in his new chapter. She kept her expression neutral. "Congratulations, Mark." He opened his mouth again, likely ready to offer some condescending remark about her moving on. but the words died when he noticed the ring on her finger. Then, the hand resting gently at the small of her back. And then recognition. Mark's eyes snapped to Drew and he visibly inhaled, realizing who exactly was standing beside his ex-wife. Drew extended his hand with a calm, polished ease. "Andrew Callahan," he said, voice courteous but immovable. "I'm Lauren's husband. Congratulations on your big day." A hush rippled through the line. Not loud, but unmistakable. Even Tessa blinked, her perfect smile wobbling. Mark's composure slipped for a fraction of a second, just enough for Lauren to see something raw flicker in his eyes. Shock. Confusion. Maybe even regret. His handshake faltered a beat too slow, a beat too tight. "You're married," he said, voice cracking just slightly on the word. "I didn't know you were seeing someone." Lauren felt the shift in the room, the subtle tilt of power she never imagined she would feel again, especially not here. She didn't gloat. Didn't smirk. She simply nodded. It happened fast. Drew's hand slid more firmly at her back, not possessive, steady. A signal, a partnership. Guests nearby began whispering, glancing between them with barely concealed fascination. "That is Andrew Callahan. Why didn't anyone know he got married?" And two, Lauren felt heat rise to her cheeks, but for once, it wasn't embarrassment. It was strength. The kind she'd forgotten she had. Mark swallowed, forcing his smile back into place. "Well, that's surprising." Drew inclined his head politely. "Life has its surprises." The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was not. Mark tried to recover, turning to Tessa. "This is Lauren, my ex-wife." Then he added stiffly, "and her husband." But her eyes flicked toward Drew and widened just slightly at the realization that Lauren had not married out of desperation, but out of reach. The receiving line had stalled. A few guests had nearly stopped breathing. In that moment, quiet, almost invisible to anyone outside that small cluster of people, Lauren felt something close to vindication. Not because Mark looked shaken, not because the whispers favored her now, but because she finally understood she wasn't the woman he had painted her to be. She wasn't the small, timid shadow he had outgrown. She was someone who could walk into a room where she once felt invisible and hold her own. Drew gently guided her forward as the line resumed, murmuring, "You okay?" She nodded, her breath unsteady. "Yeah, I think I am." Because something had shifted not only in the room but inside her. Something she didn't yet have a name for. Something fragile and powerful blooming in the quiet space between her past and her future. And before she could fully understand it, they stepped deeper into the reception hall, into bright lights, curious eyes, and a story that was only beginning to unfold. The champagne bar sat tucked beneath a sweeping staircase, a quiet alcove away from the swirling lights and murmuring guests. Lauren welcomed the momentary calm music, drifting softly, bubbles rising in her glass, the faint hum of laughter echoing from the reception hall. Drew had stepped away for a phone call, mouthing, 2 minutes, with an apologetic tilt of his head. She nodded. She didn't mind. The evening had already been overwhelming, and she needed a breath. Just one. But she barely managed a single inhale before a familiar voice slid in behind her. "Well," Mark said, his tone dripping with something that pretended to be charm, "looks like someone's upgraded." Lauren's grip tightened on her glass. She turned. Mark stood too close, still in his tux, still wearing the same slick confidence he'd always used like armor. But there was something strained beneath it, now a cracking veneer she recognized instantly. "Hello, Mark," she said coolly. He gave a low chuckle, leaning one elbow on the bar. "Callahan, huh? Quite a catch." His eyes traveled over her dress, her ring, her composure, as if trying to decode a puzzle whose answer he didn't like. "I didn't realize," he continued, lowering his voice, "that we were marrying for money these days." Lauren blinked once. Slowly. "Excuse me." "Oh, come on," he scoffed, swirling his champagne. "You expect me to believe this is real? You married to him?" He laughed again, quieter this time but sharper. "Guess you finally found someone who doesn't mind settling." There it was, the blade disguised as conversation. The same old tactic, a cut delivered with a smile. Old Lauren, the one who had bent herself into apologies and explanations, would have folded. She would have scrambled to defend herself, to justify her choices, to ease his discomfort. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She held his gaze and said nothing. And her silence unnerved him. His smile faltered. What he snapped as if offended, she wasn't playing her part in the script he knew so well. But before she could choose her next words, a familiar warmth pressed gently at the small of her back. Drew. He stepped to her side, finishing the last few words of his phone call. No, Tom, that's final. We'll discuss it Monday. Everything all right here? Mark's expression shifted instantly, struggling to reshape itself into politeness. We were just catching up, he said. Old friends, you know how it is. Drew's eyes, calm, steady, impossibly perceptive, shifted from Lauren's tense shoulders to Mark's smug tilt of chin. It took him half a second to understand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff his chest. He didn't need to. Instead, he stepped a little closer to Lauren, his presence a quiet shield. Mark, Drew said pleasantly, if your goal tonight is to make yourself look small. He let the pause settle. A handful of nearby guests turned, sensing something interesting. You don't need our help. Someone stifled a laugh loud enough that Mark heard it. A flush crept up Mark's neck, blooming across his cheeks. That's not what I drew. Didn't let him finish. His tone softened, not mocking, not cruel. Just painfully, undeniably honest. Lauren's the bravest woman in this room, he said. Anyone who's known her longer than 5 minutes can see that. He let the truth hang in the air, calm as the man who had spoken it. Then, almost gently, he added, some people just take longer to notice. Mark's jaw clenched. His fingers tightened around his champagne glass. He looked like a man who had been stripped of his script and didn't know what to do once the lines ran out. Lauren felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with a swelling warmth she didn't know how to contain. No one had ever defended her like that. Not with rage, not with wounded pride, but with clarity, with conviction. Drew turned to her, offering his arm. Come on, he murmured. Let's not spend another second of our night here. He led her back toward the ballroom, away from Mark's sputtering attempts to recover, away from the whispers that now trailed him instead of her. As they stepped under the chandelier's glow, the music shifted, soft strings, a gentle rhythm. Couples drifted onto the dance floor, moving slowly in each other's arms. Drew looked down at her. May I? He asked. Something in his voice, quiet, steady, protective without being possessive, made her heartbeat soften. She placed her hand in his. He guided her onto the dance floor, his touch warm against her back, his other hand holding hers with a care that felt almost reverent. Behind them, at the champagne bar, Mark stood motionless, face, flushed shoulders rigid, as he realized the room had just shifted around him. The man who once held every ounce of power over her now couldn't even hold the moment. Lauren rested her head lightly against Drew's shoulder as they began to sway. She didn't look back, but she felt it the exact second the past loosened its grip. And for the first time all night, she allowed herself to breathe. The orchestra shifted into a slow melody just as Drew guided Lauren toward the dance floor. The chandelier above them seemed to dim and warm, casting a soft golden glow over the room. Conversations quieted, footsteps softened, and for a moment the wedding felt like a quiet river running beneath a still night, steady, hushed waiting. Drew turned to her, offering his hand with that old-fashioned courtesy that always caught her off guard. May I have this dance, Mrs. Callahan? The title still felt unreal, yet strangely right. Lauren placed her hand in his, the warmth of his palm moving through her like a gentle current. He drew her closer, carefully, respectfully, one hand resting at her waist, the other holding hers as if she were something fragile he'd promised not to break. They began to sway. The crowd blurred into soft shapes, colors drifting like watercolor, distant and unimportant. The only things she could truly register were the music, the tender pressure of his hand, and the quiet, steady rise and fall of his breathing. For the first time in a long time, her body wasn't tense. Her shoulders softened, her pulse eased. She let herself lean in just enough that her forehead brushed the edge of his jaw. She could hear his heartbeat, a calm, even rhythm beneath the clean scent of cedar and winter air lingering on his suit jacket. You didn't have to defend me like that, she whispered, barely trusting her voice. Back there with Mark? You didn't owe me anything. Drew exhaled, the breath warm against her temple. I didn't do it for the show, he said quietly. Her eyes stung, not from pain but from the sudden, unfamiliar sensation of being protected rather than diminished. He shifted just enough to look down at her. Lauren, some people think strength just means pushing harder, talking louder. He paused, brushing his thumb in a small absent circle at her back. But real strength is knowing your worth and refusing to let someone rewrite it. I wasn't going to stand there and let him try. Her throat tightened. She tried to swallow, but the emotion swelled anyway, not just from what Mark had said tonight, but from every moment she had once shrunk herself small to keep the peace. Every apology she'd made for taking up space. Every time she had pretended she was fine while quietly breaking. How did you know? She whispered. How did you know what to say? He gave a small, soft laugh. Because I know what it looks like. People have been trying to handle me all my life. Mold me. Direct me. Use me. His voice dipped lower, more introspective. I know that kind of dismissal. It's subtle but sharp. And they always expect you to smile through it. Her breath caught. He understood more than she'd realized. A moment passed, a quiet one but full. Their steps slowed. Their bodies moved as though guided by an unspoken rhythm rather than the orchestra. Then he said almost reluctantly, whatever we've started, it feels more honest than most of the real things in my life. She lifted her head slightly, meeting his eyes. There was no performance there, no strategy, just a truth he had given her without hesitation. Her chest warmed with something dangerously close to longing, not for revenge. Not for validation, but for this tiny pocket of unexpected tenderness, this man who treated her as if she were someone worth steadying. The music thickened through its final notes, a gentle swell of strings. They didn't stop, not at first. Even as the final chord faded and polite applause rose around the ballroom, they remained exactly where they were, held together, suspended in a breath neither of them wanted to release. For a heartbeat, maybe two, they stayed like that, her hands resting lightly against his chest, his arm encircling her waist with a protective certainty that no longer felt pretend. The applause faded back into conversation. Others stepped off the floor. Glasses clinked. Laughter resumed. But in their small, golden-lit corner of the world, nothing seemed to move. Finally, reluctantly, Drew loosened his hold, but only slightly. His hand lingered at her back fingers, brushing the fabric of her green dress, as if memorizing its texture. His voice was almost a murmur. Lauren. She looked up. Yeah, he stopped himself. Whatever words had formed behind his eyes, something tender, something risky, he pulled them back before speaking them aloud. Instead, he offered a faint, breathless smile, one that felt like the beginning of something neither of them had decided to name yet. We should head back, he said, before people start assuming we've forgotten where we are. She laughed softly, a small shaky sound that felt like her chest opening just a little wider. As they stepped off the dance floor, his hand remained against her, back steady and warm, and for the first time since she'd pinned that cruel invitation to her fridge, Lauren felt something she didn't dare articulate. A quiet, rising question, a dangerous flicker of hope, a sense light as breath that this night was going to change everything. Even the things she hadn't meant to change. The next afternoon, the sky over northern Ohio hung low and gray, the kind of winter light that made everything look sharper, colder. Drew turned his car onto a long, winding driveway bordered by towering oak trees that had clearly stood there for generations. Their branches arched overhead like a vaulted ceiling, funneling them toward the massive stone house at the end. Lauren's breath hitched. The Callahan estate didn't whisper wealth, it declared legacy. Large, quiet, immovable. As the house grew closer, she felt something inside her shrink, not because she didn't belong in places like this, but because someone here would very much want her to think so. They're a lot, he said gently. Just remember you don't owe them anything. She nodded, but her palms were already damp. Inside, the foyer opened into a formal sitting room. And there they were, his parents waiting, as if this were an interview scheduled weeks in advance. His father rose first. Edward Callahan. Broad shoulders, steel gray eyes, a posture that suggested he had once commanded rooms larger than this, and still expected to. His mother Evelyn didn't rise at all, She sat perfectly still, hands folded, flawless, in a cream blouse and pearl earrings. Her expression was courteous but cool enough to chill water. "Mother," Father Drew said, steady but guarded. "This is Lauren." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Mrs. Callahan," she corrected softly, a polite smile curving her lips. "We do use married names here." Lauren returned the smile, though hers felt thinner. "Of course." They gestured for her to sit. The chair felt a little too firm, a little too upright, as if designed to keep guests from settling in. The questions began almost immediately. "So Lauren, where did you grow up? Your parents, are they still working? And you're at the community center part-time? Is that by choice?" Polite, civil, but weighted. Every question was a thread tugged, testing for weakness. Lauren answered as evenly as she could, though she could feel the flush rising in her cheeks. She wasn't ashamed of who she was, but the subtext was loud and clear. "You are not the match we envisioned." When Edward mentioned almost casually, "Of course, the Langford partnership was something we'd hoped would strengthen our family's position," she realized the words weren't accidental. They were meant to land. Evelyn added, still smiling, "Their daughter is a lovely young woman." Before she could respond, Drew leaned forward, his tone calm but sharp enough to split stone. "My marriage is not a contract addendum." His words hung in the air, a warning, a boundary also years overdue. But Lauren saw it, the tightness in his jaw, the shallow breath he took afterward. A lifetime of being positioned, steered, expected. A son molded before he had a voice. Evelyn simply lifted a brow, the smallest sign of disapproval. "Of course not," she said lightly. "We simply want what's best for you." The conversation stumbled on, but the blow had been delivered. Hours later, Drew led Lauren up the staircase, away from the stares of portraits of long-dead Callahans lining the wall. The air in the hallway felt less heavy than downstairs, but only just. He opened the door to a suite that looked like something out of a heritage magazine, polished dark wood, antique lamps, a massive four-poster bed dominating the space. "This was my room," he said quietly. "Well, my childhood room. They updated it once I moved out." She traced the carved edge of the bed frame with her fingers. "It's beautiful." "It never felt like mine," he murmured. She turned. He looked tired. Not physically, but the kind of tiredness that lived in the bones, carved there by decades of pleasing and performing. She broke the moment with a practical comment. "You should take the bed." "I can take the armchair." He blinked, surprised. "Absolutely not." "It's fine," she insisted. "Really?" "Lauren," he said gently, "I won't let you sleep folded in half just to avoid a little awkwardness." She hesitated, then whispered the thought that had been buzzing in her head since they parked the car. "If we're going to convince them, we should at least look like we sleep in the same bed." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. He finally nodded once. "All right. For appearances." They both changed in the bathroom, one at a time, backs turned, movements overly polite. When they finally slid under the covers, they lay on opposite sides of the king-size bed, as far apart as the mattress would allow. She faced the wall, he faced the door. Between them, a vast stretch of white duvet that felt like a canyon. The house creaked in the winter wind. An old grandfather clock chimed somewhere downstairs. A faint scent of cedar drifted from the wooden headboard. The sheets were cool at first, slowly warming beneath them. Minutes passed, then more. Lauren stared into the darkness, pulse stubbornly awake. Drew shifted slightly, the mattress dipping. "You okay?" he murmured. She wasn't sure how to answer. "Yes," she whispered. "Just thinking." "Me too." Another silence, but not empty, full of all the things neither of them were ready to say. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard groaned, settling. Lauren let out a quiet breath. In this enormous bed, in this intimidating house filled with expectations she wasn't meant to meet, she felt both small and strangely brave. Maybe because of the man lying 3 feet away, maybe because she wasn't facing this alone. Her eyes drifted shut, but sleep didn't come. Not for her, not for him. They lay there separated by inches and entire histories. And neither of them slept. Not yet. The first light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains, soft and silvery, the kind of Ohio winter light that seemed to hush a room rather than brighten it. Lauren stirred, not fully awake, yet breathing in warmth that didn't make sense. Her cheek rested against something steady and solid. A slow, rhythmic rise and fall pressed gently beneath her ear. She opened her eyes. She was tucked against Drew's chest, his arm resting protectively around her waist, as though it had belonged there all along. Their legs had tangled sometime in the night, and the warmth between them felt too natural, too right to have been accidental. She froze, not out of fear but out of a quiet disbelief. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Not tolerated, not judged, not bracing for the next harsh word or cold dismissal. Just safe. His heartbeat was slow, steady, immensely grounding. The kind of heartbeat you could fall asleep to or wake beside or build a life around. For a few stolen seconds, she allowed herself to stay there, sinking into that warmth like someone stepping into sunlight after a long winter. She memorized the feel of his arm, the light weight of his hand resting loosely over her hip, the way his breath brushed the crown of her head. She knew this wasn't part of their arrangement. She knew they hadn't meant for this to happen. But God, it felt real. A soft impulse rose before she could stop it. She lifted her fingers and traced a light, gentle line along his forearm, from elbow to wrist, barely touching him. He inhaled sharply. Then he stirred. His eyes blinked open, still hazy with sleep, meeting hers from inches away. For a suspended moment, neither moved. Neither breathed. The world seemed to pause with them, and just like that, the warmth turned into an almost electric awareness. His gaze dropped to where his arm held her close. Her breath caught. Then they both jolted apart. "Sorry," she blurted. "No, sorry, that was my fault," he said quickly. They scrambled to opposite edges of the mattress, sitting up like guilty teenagers in a movie, both staring anywhere except at each other. Drew ran a hand through his hair. Lauren tucked a strand of hers behind her ear, both speaking too fast, too lightly, trying to shove the moment back into a box it would never fit in again. After a long, mortified beat, Drew cleared his throat. "We should, go down for breakfast." "Yes," Lauren said, though her pulse still raced. Breakfast. They dressed in quiet, careful movements, their eyes meeting only by accident, each glance quickly abandoned like a hot coal. Downstairs, the dining room was already alive with the faint clink of cutlery and muted conversation. Evelyn Callahan sat perfectly upright at the head of the table, already surveying the room like a queen assessing the morning's order. Edward read the newspaper, though the rigid set of his jaw made it clear he wasn't absorbing a single word. "Good morning, Evelyn," said, her tone neutral but cold around the edges. "Sleep well, too well," Lauren thought, "dangerously well." "Fine, thank you," Drew replied, the slightest hitch in his voice betraying him. Lauren slid into her chair, feeling the air thicken with unspoken scrutiny. So, Evelyn began stirring her tea with a delicate clink. "Lauren, were you able to rest comfortably in a new environment? Some people struggle without familiarity." Her implication was precise, barbed. Lauren opened her mouth to answer, but Drew beat her to it. "She was fine," he said simply. "We both were." Evelyn's brows lifted an inch. "I see." The tension rose like steam from the table. Before Lauren could breathe, the side door swung open, and a woman strode in, carrying a travel mug and wearing a scarf with bright fall colors. Maggie Callahan, late 30s, sharp eyes, quick smile, and an energy that didn't match the stiffness of the house for even a second. "There you two are," she said, breezing toward the table. "I was starting to think you'd snuck out a window." Drew groaned. "Maggie, please." But Maggie wasn't looking at him. Her perceptive gaze flicked between Lauren's flushed cheeks and Drew's inability to meet anyone's eyes. Slow smile. Sly. Knowing. "Oh," she said, drawing out the word. "I see how it is." Evelyn stiffened. "Maggie, relax, Mom." Maggie cut in, dropping into a chair and stealing a piece of toast from Drew's plate. "If the way they came downstairs is any indication, they don't need your advice on how to be married." Silence. Pure crystalline silence. Lauren nearly inhaled her coffee. Drew coughed so violently that Maggie patted his back. Edward rustled his newspaper aggressively. Evelyn went stone still, lips pressed thin. Maggie only winked at Lauren, conspiratorial and warm, like she had just opened a window in a sealed, airless room. Lauren felt heat bloom in her cheeks, but she also felt something else. For the first time in this house, she wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, someone here was actually rooting for them. The rest of the table resumed movement, tension rippling beneath the surface. But for Lauren, one truth pulsed through her like a secret. Whatever had happened that morning, whatever she and Drew had woken up, tangled inside, it wasn't pretend. Not anymore. And she didn't know what scared her more, or how much she wanted to know what would happen next. The Callahan headquarters towered over downtown Cleveland like a slab of steel, ambition, sleek, cold, unmistakably powerful. When Drew pulled into the underground garage, Lauren felt her stomach twist into a tight knot. She had stepped into intimidating spaces before, but nothing like this. He noticed her silence as the elevator doors closed. "You don't have to speak," he murmured. "Just be there." But she wasn't sure being there would be enough for what waited on the top floor. When the elevator opened, they walked into a long glass hallway overlooking the lake, gray waves rolling under a pale winter sun. To their right, double doors stood open. Voices carried out sharp, impatient. The board was already seated. And beside them, two representatives from the Langford family, posture stiff, expressions stormy. As Drew stepped in, the chairman scowled. "Andrew," he said, "this is a private strategy meeting. Bringing her is highly inappropriate." Lauren felt the hit, but Drew's voice cut clean through the tension. "She's my wife. She stays." No one dared push harder, not openly. But the disapproval in the room thickened, almost physical. They began the meeting without pleasantries. A Langford representative, a man in an immaculate gray suit, launched into the attack. "Our agreement hinged on a family alliance. Your marriage was not part of the plan, and frankly, it's jeopardizing the wind project entirely." Another board member added, "Local communities already distrust corporate developments. Without the Langford name formally attached to yours, approvals will stall or fail." Lauren sat beside Drew at the long table, the only one without a stack of files, without a title, without a pedigree. From where they stood, she must have looked like a placeholder, an outsider, someone not meant to speak. Drew stayed calm, but she could sense the tension in him. This wasn't like confronting Mark in a ballroom. This was legacy pressure and expectation wrapped into one immovable wall. She listened as they argued about numbers, land value, political sway, never once mentioning the actual people whose homes bordered the proposed wind farm. People who would hear the turbines, people who would see them from kitchen windows, people who feared being ignored, people like the families she worked with every day. A slow heat built in her chest. She didn't plan to speak. She didn't even fully realize she was sitting forward until her hands were on the table. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Every head turned. A few eyebrows lifted. One Langford rep blinked as though she were an unexpected glitch in the system. Lauren swallowed, pulse hammering. "I think you're missing the real problem." "Which is?" the chairman asked clearly, expecting an answer he could swat away. "The community," she said simply. A soft, dismissive laugh escaped someone at the far end of the table. Lauren didn't flinch. "At the community center, we host families from all around that area. And I've heard their concerns firsthand: noise fears, property value, rumors, the feeling that powerful people make decisions miles away without ever walking their streets." The room quieted. She continued, steady now. "If you pitch this as a corporate deal between wealthy families, they'll fight you. But if you invite them into the process, if you show them what clean energy means for their kids, for their land, for their future, they'll show up." She stood, her body moving before doubt could drag her back down, and crossed to the whiteboard. With the sure, fluid handwriting she once used in her third-grade classroom, she started outlining her idea: host town halls in the neighborhoods closest to the turbines. Set aside a portion of the revenue for community microgrants, gardens, after-school programs, local repairs. Offer guided tours of the wind site once construction starts. Let families see the science behind it. Bring in school kids, make it something they're proud to have in their backyard. Lines and arrows formed under her marker, a living plan taking shape. She didn't hear the room's reaction at first. She only heard her heartbeat and the faint scent of dry erase ink. When she finally faced them, the room wasn't dismissive anymore. One board member leaned forward, frowning thoughtfully. "If we pitch it that way," he said slowly, "we're not forcing this on them. We're inviting them into it." The Langford rep, who had laughed at her earlier, tapped a pen against the table, eyes narrowed in new respect. It could work, he admitted. Honestly, it might build more goodwill than any marriage alliance. A quiet, stunned beat followed. Lauren felt Drew's gaze before she saw it. When she turned, she found him looking at her with something incandescent admiration without disguise, pride without restraint. No performance, no pretend marriage, just a man seeing a woman he had underestimated in all the best ways, as if she were the missing piece to a puzzle he'd been struggling with for years. Her cheeks warmed, but she held his gaze, neither of them looking away. Then the chairman cleared his throat. Well, he said, stiff but begrudgingly impressed, it seems. Mrs. Callahan has offered us a viable path forward. Mrs. Callahan. For the first time, the name didn't feel like an act, it felt earned. She sat down slowly, her pulse still fluttering. Drew's hand brushed hers under the table, just a small touch, a thank you, a connection. But to her, it felt like a spark catching fire. The meeting moved on, energized, hopeful. A plan that had been collapsing an hour ago now had a future, and it was because of her. Her. As the room began to pack up their files, Lauren felt emotions swell. Fear, yes, but also fierce pride. She had walked into that room invisible. She wasn't invisible anymore. Drew leaned close, his voice low. "You saved the deal," he said. "You saved everything." She shook her head, whispering, "We saved it." But he didn't look away. "Lauren, you don't know what you just proved." Before she could ask what he meant, the door opened and people filed out, leaving them for a moment in the echo of the boardroom's cold light. Drew's eyes stayed on her, warm, unguarded. And she felt it again, that shift, that pull, that dangerous, breathless something growing between them. Something that had nothing to do with deals or marriages of convenience. Something real. Something she wasn't ready to name yet. But it was there. A beginning. Drew's downtown condo always felt quiet, but that night the quiet carried a different weight. The city lights shimmered beyond the tall windows, reflecting across the river in ripples of gold and silver. After the relentless intensity of the boardroom, the silence here felt almost sacred. Lauren kicked off her shoes with a sigh. The carpet felt soft beneath her tired feet, and she could still feel the echo of adrenaline pulsing faintly through her. Drew loosened his tie, tossed it onto the couch, and went straight to the kitchen counter, where an unopened bottle of red wine waited. "After today," he said, pulling out the cork with a soft pop, "I think we've earned something better than tap water." She let out a laugh, a real one from somewhere deep in her chest. "Well," she said, "not everyone saves a multi-million-dollar deal before lunch." He handed her a glass. Their fingers brushed. "That was you," he said. "I just sat there trying not to grin like an idiot." They settled on the floor, backs against the sofa, a warm pizza box between them. Their formal clothes had been traded for jeans, worn socks, and soft sweaters, a stark contrast to the marble and suits and tension of earlier. It felt right. They ate straight from the box, comparing the burnt edges, the uneven slices, laughing about the board members' frozen faces when she'd taken over the whiteboard. "You should have seen Langford's expression," Drew said, shaking his head. "I think the man physically forgot how to blink." She snorted. "I was terrified. You didn't look it. Inside I was a mess." He took a sip of wine and looked at her warmly. "Lauren, you were extraordinary." The room softened around them. The river shimmered quietly outside, and something in his tone, gentle, reverent, made her breath catch. A slow, quiet settled in, not heavy, not awkward. Just calm. Lauren traced her finger along the rim of her glass. "I never thought I'd be a wife again," she said softly. Drew's eyes lifted to hers. "I never thought I'd have a life that felt like mine," he replied. "I figured I'd spend the rest of it being a public asset." The words hung between them, shared truth, mutual ache. He set his glass down. Then he stood. At first she thought he was gathering dishes or reaching for a blanket, but then he crossed the room deliberately, almost nervously, and opened a drawer in the sideboard. Her breath stilled. He turned back around with a small, dark blue velvet box in his hand. It wasn't the simple ring box from their courthouse wedding. This one looked older, heavier, meant to hold something chosen, not something convenient. He walked toward her slowly, each step measured as though he were terrified of misplacing a single word of what he was about to say. and then quietly, without flourish or showmanship, he knelt. Not as a billionaire, not as a man making a statement, but as someone offering his heart with both hands open. "Lauren," he began, voice steady but threaded with emotion, "our first marriage. It was a strategy. It saved us both in its own strange way." She felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. "But I don't want to spend the rest of my life pretending." He swallowed breath, trembling just a little. "I love you, not the idea of you. You. The woman who spilled coffee on me and apologized like she'd set the world on fire. The woman who carried an invitation like a wound, but still kept going. The woman who walked into a room built to make her feel small, and stood tall anyway." Her vision blurred. One tear fell onto her hand. He opened the velvet box. Inside was a ring unlike their first, an oval-cut sapphire, surrounded by a delicate halo of diamonds, deep blue, like the river beyond the windows. Quiet elegance, honest beauty, a ring chosen with thought and hope. "Will you marry me?" he said softly, "for real this time? No deals, no performances, just us." Her breath shook. She covered her mouth with her trembling hand. All at once, she felt every version of herself. The woman Mark had told wasn't enough. The woman who had cried over bills in a small kitchen. The woman who thought life had already given her its answer. Rise into someone new. Someone worthy. Someone wanted. Someone loved. She nodded before she could speak. Then, with her voice breaking in the softest, truest way, she whispered, "Yes." He exhaled a sound of relief, joy, and something like wonder, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though her hand had been waiting for it. She leaned forward, cupping his face, and kissed him, not fiercely, not urgently, but with deep, quiet certainty. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't escape. This wasn't performance. This was choosing him. Choosing each other. On purpose. When they finally pulled back forehead to forehead, breath mingling, she whispered, "I want to wake up next to you again." His answering smile was the kind that changed the shape of a man's whole life. And somewhere between the river lights and the quiet hum of the city, their second beginning took root. The lake shimmered like a sheet of warm silver as the sun dipped low behind the pines. A soft breeze carried the scent of late summer leaves and the faint sweetness of wildflowers growing along the water's edge. On this quiet little property in upstate New York, far from boardrooms, far from country clubs, far from every expectation they had once been trapped beneath, Lauren stood barefoot on a wooden dock lined with simple string lights. Maggie fussed with the hem of her dress. Lauren's mother dabbed her eyes every few seconds. A handful of close friends sat on folding chairs, their silhouettes glowing beneath the lantern-like bulbs. It was nothing like the wedding she once imagined for herself. It was better. When Drew stepped onto the dock, the boards creaked gently under his weight. He wore a navy linen suit and no tie, the top button undone, the late daylight softening the angles of his face. He looked peaceful, happier than she'd ever seen him. They met in the center, hands finding each other with the certainty of something long chosen. The officiant, an old community center volunteer who insisted on being part of their story, cleared his throat. "Well," he said, smiling at them through thick glasses, "I suppose we should begin before the sun decides to steal the show." Laughter rippled through the small audience. They read the vows they had written themselves. Hers included a mention of spilled coffee courthouse vows spoken under fluorescent lights, and the day she pinned an unwanted invitation to her fridge and unknowingly changed her life. His mentioned wind turbines and community meetings, and how she had walked into his world unpolished, unpretending, and rewrote the way he understood home. And of course they both mentioned one very badly timed wedding invitation. When the ceremony ended, the sun finally slid behind the tree line, leaving the sky bruised with purples and soft gold. Drew kissed her, and the string lights flickered to life above them, as though blessing the moment. It was small, it was simple, it was exactly right. A year later, their lives looked nothing like the ones they left behind. Lauren stood in the middle of the newly expanded community center in Cleveland, watching a group of teenagers paint a mural along the front hallway. The air smelled like acrylic paint and cinnamon rolls from the small cafe she'd helped open on the first floor. The expansion had been her dream. The foundation funding it, bearing her name, was Drew's. "This place is changing kids' lives," her coworker said, passing by with a clipboard. Lauren smiled softly. It's changing mine too. Meanwhile, Drew had found a new rhythm of his own. He still sat in boardrooms when needed, but more and more she found him in classrooms, high schools across the county, talking to students about renewable energy, answering questions, sparking curiosity. It made him lighter somehow, more grounded, more himself. One cool autumn afternoon, Lauren finished her paperwork and sat on the living room sofa, her legs tucked under her. Sunlight streamed through the windows of their home, a cozy two-story house by the river, lined with books, plants, and little pieces of the life they'd built together. She pulled up a news article on her tablet. The headline caught her eye: Local attorney Mark Harper finalizes divorce after tumultuous year. She blinked. There he was, her ex-husband, polished as ever in the photo, but with a strain behind his eyes she didn't remember. The article mentioned constant pressure to impress, conflicting expectations, and never feeling good enough. Lauren stared at the words, waiting for the old sting, but all she felt was a faint loosening inside her chest. Not gloating, not pity, just release, like an old knot quietly coming undone. She set the tablet aside. From the doorway, she heard a frustrated sound. "Okay," Drew muttered, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug. "I officially surrender." She turned. He sat surrounded by wooden panels, scattered screws, and instructions from a flat-pack bookshelf. One screw was stuck to his sock. Another had mysteriously disappeared. "This thing is mocking me," he added, picking up a dowel rod and examining it as though it had personally betrayed him. She laughed, warm and full. "Move over." She knelt beside him, tugging the screwdriver from his hand. Together they sorted the pieces, fitting the puzzle into something that finally resembled a shelf. Drew held boards steady, she tightened screws, and every few minutes he'd mutter, "How are you so good at this?" as though she were solving quantum equations and not assembling furniture. When they slid the final shelf into place, he let out a triumphant breath, then pulled her into his arms, laughing into her hair. "You know," he murmured against her forehead, "for a billionaire, I'm pretty bad at putting things together." She smiled, leaning into him. "Good thing you married someone who knows how to build from scratch." His arms tightened around her. And in that warm, ordinary living room, with a half-finished bookshelf, a messy rug, and sunlight catching in the dust motes, Lauren realized this was the ending she never believed she'd get. Not lavish, not perfect, not a performance, just a life, shared, steady, chosen, every day. The quiet kind of triumph that didn't need an audience. Just him, just her, just home. Sometimes healing begins where we least expect it. Not in the moments when everything is polished and perfect, but in the quiet spaces where life surprises us with a second chance. Lauren thought her story had already been written, a small life, a broken heart, a future made of compromises. Yet, life placed someone in her path not to rescue her, but to remind her that she had never been as small as she'd been made to feel. What this story whispers to us is simple, and yet so easy to forget. We are allowed to outgrow the versions of ourselves that formed in the shadows of someone else's doubts. We are allowed to begin again, even at 40, 50, 70. Even after disappointment, even after being unseen for too long. And sometimes the most powerful kind of revenge is a quiet, ordinary happiness, built slowly, honestly, with someone who sees your worth without you having to prove it. May Lauren's journey remind us all life can still open softly and unexpectedly in the places where our hearts once closed. Thank you for spending this time with us. In a world that moves so fast, it means more than you know that you chose to pause and share this moment, this story, this breath of humanity. If Lauren's journey touched something in you, a memory, a quiet hope, a reminder of your own strength, please know you're not alone. We carry these stories together. Thank you for being here with us. Every like, share, and subscribe helps us tell more stories that touch the soul. Your support keeps this little corner of kindness alive and helps more hearts find their way to it. Until the next story, take gentle care of yourself.